They say some memories never leave you. These are 3 true stories people told me because they couldn't make them stop, because the unease folded itself into the corners of their days and would not be shaken. They will follow you into 2026. I want to tell them simply. The people who lived them spoke in small, precise sentences, the way you speak when you try to anchor yourself to a thing that still feels unreal. Listen to their words. Picture their rooms, their campuses, the parking lot light. Hear the tiny sounds they heard. If this reaches you, if even one of these stories scratches at the edge of your own life, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss follow-ups. Now, 3 accounts, 3 breaches of safety that didn't end with a door being closed. She was an English major, a sophomore. She remembers ink on fingernails from grading a peer's paper, the smell of used coffee in the seminar room, a TA who always lingered a little too long at the back of class. He had a quiet way of correcting her emails, small edits that felt flattering. He was called Raw. There was also Luke, a frat kid who kept discussions lively and found easy ways to sit near her during group projects. It started as an attention she welcomed. It felt like being noticed for once. The romance felt normal at the beginning. Luke would text her after class. He showed her a corner of his life that seemed careless and open. Photos of road trips, jokes with his brothers, silly videos. She thought he liked her. She let him take pictures of her with her hair up, the way friends sometimes do, snapshots to remember an evening. None of it felt threatening. Nothing about the early pictures made her stomach drop. Then she started seeing things she hadn't agreed to, little at first. A glimpse of herself on his screen when he laughed with someone else. A photo sent between his friends that made her heart jitter. An image she recognized as one of the selfies they'd taken after a study session. She saved the message and stared at it for a long time. She tells me she woke up that night with a thudding, electrical panic in her chest. This wasn't like someone keeping a memory. This felt like something else. She didn't immediately accuse him. She confronted Luke in the gentle way she wanted to be believed. He admitted to keeping photos, but he played it off like it was normal college behavior. Boys who collect images, who show them to each other, who don't think about the consequences. She says he was defensive then, quiet. She remembers his voice tilting in a way that made the words sound like pleading and deflection at once. She snooped. I'm telling this exactly as she told it, because that's how she found out the worst piece. She opened his phone when he left it on the table. The gallery was a clutter of images and screenshots. Toward the end, there were messages to an unsaved number, regular, almost casual transmissions of pictures and captions. She couldn't keep looking, but one name in his contacts made everything tilt. Raw, the TA, the man who corrected her emails. When she dragged the truth onto the table, when she asked Luke why he was sending images to her TA, he said something that sounded rehearsed. He said Raw paid him, that it was money for access, for photos. He said he didn't think much of it at the time. He said he didn't understand the harm. He said he was sorry. She says she called the police because that's what you do when someone tells you your privacy has been rented out without your consent. The police came. They took statements. The campus administration got involved. According to her, Luke was expelled and Raw was fired. She says she heard later that there was criminal inquiry, but she doesn't know the specifics. She puts it carefully. I think there were charges, she tells me. I don't know if anything stuck. Even with disciplinary measures, justice felt thin. It's one thing for someone to lose a job or be dismissed from campus. It's another thing to feel like your skin isn't a private place anymore. She remembers the way the disciplinary meeting room smelled like old air and stale coffee, how administrative language tried to translate violation into policy. The campus offered resources and counseling. She accepted some. They offered to help with housing changes and to limit contact. They did what institutions do. They documented, they filed, they referred. Months passed. For at least a year, she tried to rebuild the ordinary pattern of her days. She studied. She avoided being alone with grad students and men who lingered at the edge of meetings. She learned to delete photos on phones more aggressively, but the worst moments were not in those rooms. They were small, domestic, almost ridiculous in how normal they were until they weren't. One night, a year and a half after the confrontation and the expulsion and the firing, she was at a sorority event, closing up, stacking chairs, half of the group already gone. It was late. She remembers the echo of plastic chairs and someone's jacket hitting the rack. She stepped out to the porch and noticed a silver sedan parked across the street. It wasn't an extraordinary car. It could have been waiting for someone or pulling over to check a map. But there was a sense to it she couldn't disentangle. She watched the car for a long minute. Her phone buzzed with a group chat about pizza, and she told herself she was being dramatic. Then she saw a shadow move behind the driver's side window. Her heart did something she tried not to name. She says she felt watched in the way you feel the profile of a presence on the other side of glass. She called a friend, and they walked her back inside. The car pulled away, silently, into the night. That sighting didn't end anything. It didn't lead to another arrest. It didn't even lead definitively back to the man who had once had her photos. But the meaning of being followed, of having space occupied by someone else's attention, stayed. She found herself checking windows at night. She asked roommates to come with her when she left the building. She stopped taking long walks alone. She tried to translate the fear into practical changes, but practicality doesn't always mend what is invisible and intimate. What haunts her, she says, is not only what happened in the phone's gallery. It's that someone with access, someone in a position of institutional power, could trade on that access and make her into an image for other people to possess. She says she doesn't sleep the same way. She doesn't photograph herself the same way. She has learned that certain people can take what seems private and, with a few taps, make it public. The betrayal was not just of her body or her privacy. It was the betrayal of trust on a campus that promised safety and learning. If you think that was the worst, wait. The next man was named Mike. He was 22 and used to sleeping with the window cracked in the early winter to catch the pine smell that drifted through. His parents were abroad for 6 weeks, and he'd gone back to the family house to watch the dog and clear snow from the driveway. The house was old in the kindly way of small towns, with rooms that held the echoes of voices and the faint creak of the back stair when the kitchen warmed up. He liked it. He liked the quiet. He liked the knowledge that someone would be home soon, that the trip had an end. He points out that the house was supposed to be secure. He'd locked the doors like he always did, counted the deadbolts in his head as he went from room to room. Back door, front door, kitchen door. He says he checked the windows, even clicked the pane inward to ensure it sat snug. On the third night, a snowfall dulled the world until the trees sagged under white. He fell asleep thinking of the big, blank morning, shoveling, making coffee, picking up a package from the mailbox. He woke to the closet door scraping open. He remembers it vividly. The thin sound of wood moving against wood, the small whisper of fabric as something shifted inside. He says it wasn't loud at first. It was the kind of sound you might imagine if you had a dream about someone entering your room. But when he opened his eyes, there were 2 figures standing at the edge of his bed. He sees the scene like a slow film now, the 2 shapes outlined against the dim rectangle of moonlight spilling through the window. He says he could not tell faces. He could tell posture. One had a slight tilt to his head, as if listening. The other stood rigid, like a sentry. He reached under his pillow for the flashlight he told me he kept there, an old habit from when he camped as a kid. The beam sliced into the room. One figure moved, the other lunged. Mike says time went muscle slow. There was a clatter. He remembers the metallic ring of something hitting the floor. He vaulted from the bed, and the beam sliced across a kitchen knife, sliding to a stop at the edge of the mattress. The intruders scattered toward the hall. Something slammed against the front door as it opened and then closed. The sound of boots in snow. Mike ran after them, half-dressed, headlamp bouncing. He reached the porch in time to see footprints disappearing into the white yard, 2 sets heading toward the tree line. The car they might have used was gone. He chased the tracks until his lungs burned, then turned back because he could hear nothing but his heartbeat and the sieve of falling snow. He called the police. They came fast, with flashlights punching through the dark. They dusted for prints, peered in the closets, checked the window locks, noted that the front door had been ajar. They asked routine questions. Had he left anything unlocked? Who knew he was alone? Did he know anyone who might want to do this? He told them he had no enemies he could name. He told them that doors had been locked, that he used the chain lock each night even though it was old. They made a report. They told him to stay with a friend for a while. They suggested maybe the chain had slipped. Maybe a latch had failed. They took his statement and left. The presence of the knife changed everything. He says he understood, in a way he had not before, how close he'd been to the raw edge of harm. There were other small revelations. Mud on the carpet from the intruder's shoes, a smear on the wallpaper where a hand had brushed through, a hair that wasn't his. But there was no identity to hang on, no face, no license plate, only footprints turning into white that melted as the morning came. In the weeks that followed, Mike became a man who listened. He would startle at the creak of the fridge. He checked the locks compulsively, clicked them like an old metronome. His friends invited him to stay, and he accepted. He didn't stay in his old room for long. The house felt altered, as if the sheets retained someone else's outline. He imagined the 2 figures at the edge of his bed, and realized that the shape of the world could change in a single night. He told me that he couldn't reconcile the police's casual mentions of an unlocked door with his certainty that everything had been secured. He felt the legal machinery do its work in the way institutions do. Checklists, suggestions, polite concern. But the question, how had they gotten in, stayed with him in the way a needle stays under the skin. He slept with his phone by his hand and a baseball bat by the bed for months. He never heard again what those men wanted. He never saw them. He never could know whether he had been a target or simply an unlucky household in the wrong place at the wrong time. He says what haunts him now is the idea of a threshold crossed without sound, the slow fact of someone moving within his private room while he slept, the smallness of the difference between being safe and not. It was not theatrical, it was domestic, precise, horrifying in its everydayness. He has dreams of a hand on his shoulder, wakes with the taste of cold in his mouth. He still checks closets. That felt intimate in a different way, and if you think the third one is quieter, you'd be wrong. Natasha was 23 when she moved into her first solo apartment. It had a corner window that looked over the parking lot and a kitchen with a cracked tile she intended to replace someday. She worked remotely. Her days were a patchwork of emails, quick kettles of water, and walks to Chipotle when she needed a change of scene. She liked routine. It made the hours manageable. She had friends who texted her late-night playlists. She felt the small triumph of a place that was all hers. One night, she noticed a navy blue sedan parked in the lot below. It wasn't anything special, but over the next few days, she saw the car again and again. Sometimes it would be there when she returned from the gym. Sometimes it would be near the dumpster when she took out trash. Once, she drew the curtains back and found a grey hoodie moving behind the wheel. She tried to shrug it off. Her mind gifted her explanations the way it always does. The car belongs to a neighbor, a delivery driver, someone visiting a friend. But she couldn't shake the timing. Whenever she left the building, the same car seemed to be waiting. She began to notice other small things. Footprints that led up to the side door then stopped, a cigarette butt by the stairs. A person standing across the street pretending to look at a phone. She tells me she started photographing these things, not to become a sleuth, but to keep evidence of unease, a paper trail in pixels. The navy sedan cropped up in several of her photos, always in peripheral positions, often just long enough to register. Then he started appearing in public. She was in line for a burrito, and he was behind her with the same grey hoodie. She saw him once across the street, pretending to tie his shoe as she passed. He never approached her directly. He never spoke. The pattern itself was the message. She says she felt followed in broad daylight in the places she had believed were ordinary. She called the police the night she found the same car idling outside her building while the parking lot was nearly empty. A unit drove by and then left. They told her there was little they could do without a crime in progress. It was a procedural answer, and it gutted her in the way only official distance can. The escalation that finally broke her was a note. It was small and handwritten, tucked under the door like a threat wrapped in domesticity. It read, "You should really close your blinds at night." No name, no signature, just a punctuation of ownership without explanation. She swept the note into her palm and felt the paper's grain. Her legs buckled. She called a friend to come over. She packed a bag that night, paid an early move-out fee she couldn't afford, and left as quickly as she could. The landlord allowed the early exit but made clear the penalty. She paid it because she felt the note on the inside of her skull, the way a persistent fly buzzes just behind the ear. Weeks later, when she thought the apartment was finally a memory, she was at her parents' house for the weekend, older hardwood floors, the smell of someone else's coffee brewing, and she saw the navy sedan parked a few houses down on her parents' street. She sat in the car and watched, a small animal stalking its shelter, the same color, same shape. She couldn't tell whether it was the same person. She could tell only that the pattern had continued, that the line of distance had stretched and not broken. Natasha says she carried the note in her pocket for a time, folding it into layers between tissue and receipts. She wouldn't throw it away. It was proof of being observed. She took pictures of every parking lot she passed through for months. She changed her routine, moved live far from where she worked, avoided the Chipotle across town. But the seed of another person's attention had been planted. She felt watched on vacation, in cafes, in her mother's house. She described this sensation as being in a glass room where people could come and look in at will. She called the police repeatedly, reporting sightings. Each time she waited on hold, described the pattern, and felt as if her words were tolls being paid into a bureaucratic ledger. The officers were courteous but bounded by procedure. They advised her to document, to get a restraining order if the pattern continued, to upgrade cameras. They offered sympathy. They also noted the absence of a direct threat. The note wasn't violent. The sedan, on its own, wasn't a crime. The line between what feels like stalking and what counts as prosecutable wrongdoing was, to her, a ragged seam. She moved out abruptly and began to draft living patterns not around comfort, but around safety. She moved to another city, took a job that started earlier so she could avoid evenings alone, and changed routines so small they felt embarrassing. Different grocery stores, different coffee shops. But she still saw the car once, weeks later, near her parents' house. It was the way some insect repeats its pattern, oblivious to a human's rearrangement of life. These three stories share a shape. The intrusion begins as attention and becomes possession. Whether the perpetrator is someone inside an institution, or two silhouettes in a rural house, or a man in a hoodie in a parking lot, the result is the same. A private life is invaded, and the person who lives it is left with the long task of relearning how to be at ease in a room. They also share another thing: institutional limits. Campus processes moved slowly and in rigid categories. Police offered procedures and polite lines. Landlords read rules and fees and could not always act in the face of something that was legally ambiguous. The survivors encountered a kind of formal empathy that helped in paperwork and counseling, but could not retrieve the small, stolen interior spaces, the late-night privacy, the feeling of moving through a world where you are not the subject, but the object of someone else's attention. These kinds of violations don't have a tidy endpoint. Even when administrators take action and the legal system moves, the emotional cost lingers. The woman who once submitted to an English seminar still sits opposite a room differently now. Mike keeps a flashlight within arm's reach. Natasha looks at parking lots the way others look at open water, with a brief, instinctive searching. What does it mean for a story like this to haunt a year? For them, the haunting is not a line in a case file. It's the small choices you make to avoid a reminder. It's the way night and sound recalibrate under the pressure of memory. It's the way a car's silhouette can speak an old terror into being. There is, too, something uncanny in the modern shape of these invasions. We live in a world where images are endlessly portable, where a photo captured in a private moment can be transferred with the swipe of a thumb, where a person's presence can be tracked without their consent by mere pattern recognition, the repeated parking lot, the same seat in a coffee shop. We are more connected and more vulnerable at the same time. For each narrator, technology and proximity became instruments of anxiety. And yet with each story, there's also an element of stubborn human refusal. Not revenge, not confrontation, but a refusal to let fear entirely design life. The woman who had her photos circulated changed schools of thought about how she took photos and whom she allowed near her screens. She sought counseling. She found other friends she trusted. Mike rebuilt his sense of home step by step, sleeping in someone else's spare room until the house felt less like a stage where faceless actors could appear. Natasha left, paid the fee she couldn't afford, and rebuilt a pattern of days that made space for small comforts again. At the same time, repair is messy. Each of them carried a residue, a shadow that bled into choices they had to make about where to live, who to date, how to let someone into the room again. Trust is the hardest building to reconstruct. Institutions can sanction, and police can file reports, but the emotional architecture of returning to ordinary life, closing blinds without flinching, rolling over and sleeping through a creak, sometimes doesn't get rebuilt so much as rerouted. If there's a single image that threads through all three, it's the idea of being watched from the other side of a property line or a device screen. The watchers are sometimes known, sometimes anonymous. They sometimes have names and positions of power. But often they're just patterns: a car in the parking lot, an unsaved number receiving messages, two figures moving through a bedroom at night. The essential cruelty is the same. Your solitude is no longer solely yours. These stories will haunt 2026 because the structures that allowed them, unchecked access to intimate images, lacks thresholds for intrusion. The way policing and administration handle ambiguity are not new. They are continually reshaped by technology and by our decisions about what counts as harm. The haunting is not just personal, it's social. Each private violation reflects back on how a community defines safety, consent, and the limits of institutional responsibility. So what do we do with that knowledge? Not a manual, not a how-to list, but a reminder. When a friend says something small, "Someone's been parking outside my building," listen. When a person says their privacy has been violated, treat it as a wound that requires attention, even if the paperwork takes time. Believe the texture of someone's fear without needing it to fit into neat categories. Institutions can improve, of course, but individual attention matters. I won't close with comfort. That would be dishonest. These stories don't end with neat justice or the sudden unmaking of fear. They end with people who had to change their lives to avoid being wrung out by someone else's attention. They end with small, stubborn acts of survival. Changing apartments, keeping a light on, sleeping in a friend's spare bed. They end with the knowledge that a car of a certain color could appear at your parents' street. and the old, familiar rolling of dread will follow you there. Imagine a late window and a navy sedan beneath it. Imagine a phone buzzing with an unsaved number. Imagine the slow scrape of a closet door in the dark. These are ordinary details. They are also the edges of violation. They are the things that will follow these three people into 2026, and that linger, like breath on glass, in the corners of anyone paying attention. If any of these stories touch something in you, if you have lived through a similar violation or have questions about what happened to someone you know, leave a comment below. Share your experience or a name you'd like us to follow up with. These reports deserve attention, and the conversation matters. Subscribe for more true accounts and for updates on these stories. We'll follow each thread with care. They told me their truths not because they wanted something dramatic on a screen, but because they wanted to be heard. They wanted the small authority of being believed. They wanted to remind us that some threats don't make headlines but do make lives smaller. And they wanted to pass the feeling along, the way you hand a warning to someone entering a dark room. Look, be careful. Tonight, when you close your blinds, remember one thing: someone could be watching. Not always with malice that can be punished, not always with a face you can point to. Sometimes it's a pattern that repeats, a car that parks where cars shouldn't, a phone number that carries your image. That is the modern haunting. It will not go away simply because we will it to. It stays as a question mark in the margin of our daily routines. Who watches you when you think you are alone?